Okay, all right. And so it's great. I can see you good on my end.
Great. Well, thanks everyone for sticking through the day and attending this last presentation on rescheduling. My name is Khurshid Khoja. I'm sorry that I can't be there in person to join you, but I'm glad that I can at least be there in spirit and electronically. So. This panel, given that we've only got about half an hour on this subject, it's a very complicated subject, and so I've really tried to focus on a couple of different aspects. By no means does it capture, the entire subject, and so I would encourage everyone to look at the materials that were provided for my presentation as well. There's two.
Oh, yeah, no, never, I don't.
Oh.
Hey, hi, Khurshid.
Hey, Ellen.
Okay, I'm herding the cats. Okay, Khurshid is ready for his presentation. Let's everybody please take a seat. Thank you.
One more.
All right. Ellen, why don't you just mute yourself and then we can keep going.
What'd you say, Lauren? What'd you say, Lauren?
If you, Ellen, can you mute yourself because we're getting background noise as soon as we're ready, I guess. There we go. All right. Okay. So I'm assuming we're ready to go. All right. So again, the presentation is going to be kind of a small snippet of the entire subject of rescheduling, and so
A minute. Because I'm muted, you're not coming through nearly loud enough. So hold on.
Okay.
Try it again, Khurshid.
Okay. Can you hear me now?
So please proceed.
How about now? Is that good? Testing.
Hey,
Testing.
can you hear me?
Loud and clear.
Yeah,
I can hear you. Yeah, I can hear you absolutely. You can still hear me when you're on mute?
I can hear you.
Okay. All right. Fantastic. So I will get started then. Great. All right. So this panel is about rescheduling, and I'm going to try to cover a couple of very discrete topics within that large topic during this half hour. So this presentation is about what comes next. It's a brief review of possible DEA and FDA actions in response to the HHS rescheduling recommendation. All right. Here we go. A little detail about me. All right, this probably won't work very well because I can't really hear anybody while Ellen's on mute, but maybe we can go off mute for just a second here. I like to play this little game. I did this at the Normal Legal Committee in Key West, and I think this is also a good group for this game show. So, name that drug warrior. Can you identify the former drug war advocate speaking in each of these quotes? So here's a quote, and I'll let you guys read that. And I will move on to the next quote here. Well, actually, before I do that, can anyone name the speaker here? Anyone got a guess?
John Ehrlichman.
Yep, John Ehrlichman. All right, bingo. Here's another one. Identify the former drug war advocate in this quote. And this is a trick question, a little bit of a trick question. All right, you guys got a guess?
Joe Biden.
That's right. Joe Biden. So this is from the president's October 6, 2022 proclamation on marijuana law reform and federal pardons. So he's come a long way. Next slide here. Oh, there we go. Okay. So in response to that declaration, the Department of Health and Human Services issued a recommendation on August 29th to the DEA recommending that they reschedule marijuana from Schedule 1 to Schedule 3. So what does this mean? It means no more reefer madness, right? The FDA is finally acknowledging that there is accepted medical use of cannabis for the first time And it's also acknowledging lower abuse potential to boot by going with Schedule 3. So fairly monumental change in the federal government's position, and certainly that is quite welcome. Let's see how it plays out, though. So what will the DEA do in response? So here again, we're not asking about what they should do, right? I mean, I think we all know that they should deschedule marijuana, which is highly unlikely right now. So for our purposes, the better questions are, what must it do? What can it do? And from its recent letter to Congress, it's, took pains to emphasize to Congress that they are the final authority when it comes to scheduling decisions, right? So they confirm that they are conducting their review, but that at the end of the day, it's up to them. They're the final authority on rescheduling of cannabis, but they are looking at the HHS recommendation. All right. So what must the DEA do? What can it do? Generally, the procedures, the processes, and the authority for the DEA to engage in scheduling decisions is in 21 USC 821. There we go. Okay. Section 811A grants the AG and by proxy the DEA scheduling authority, and it outlines the process for scheduling rulemaking. So this is going really fast. Why is it doing that? Okay. Shoot. There we go. Okay. This has a mind of its own, apparently. In any case, Section 811A also lays out the rulemaking, some of the rulemaking details, and I've included some of the pertinent details about the rulemaking process in the materials that I provided to Ellen. So you guys will have that in your drives there. I'm not going to cover the rulemaking part of it. I think, while that's somewhat interesting, there are far more interesting things going on here. So moving on to Section 811B, this on its face requires the DEA to request and or act on the HHS medical and scientific evaluation that they received in August. And the text of the statute says the recommendations of the Secretary to the Attorney General shall be binding on the Attorney General as to such scientific and medical matters. And if the Secretary recommends that a drug or other substance not be controlled, the Attorney General shall not control the drug or other substance. And obviously, if they recommend that there's a rescheduling, you would assume that it means the same thing here, that the Attorney General shall do what the HHS Secretary says, or at least that's what we read there in 811B. Now, not quite that simple, right? There is an 8-factor test that is laid out in statute, and Section 811C provides an 8-factor analysis. I'm not going to go through those factors. Kind of the FDA, HHS went through that analysis, and it's in the letter that they provided, the recommendation they provided to the DEA, the full text of which is also included with your material. So you can see how they worked through those 8 factors, and those factors are set forth in Section 811C. I guess the interesting thing to point out here is that the DEA kind of has its thumb on the scales, right? It also applies a 5-factor test that it's promulgated under its regulations. And in the past, it has used that 5-factor test to essentially quash any rescheduling petitions. And so, we have here a quote from the Normal blog. The DEA has used this 5-factor test, offensively, essentially to preclude any rescheduling of cannabis, right? And in its 2016 rejection of the rescheduling petition, it goes through the 5-part test, right? And so the factors there are listed. And what's interesting there is not only is it a way for the kind of DEA to stack the deck against any kind of change in scheduling of cannabis, it also kind of reminds us of why it's impossible for botanical cannabis to ever be an FDA approved drug, right? There is not standardized chemistry going on there. Every cultivar is different. And so it's really difficult to actually pass the 5-factor test and pass criteria to be an FDA approved drug, right? You just cannot. It's not a single cannabinoid, type of drug. We're talking about the entire plant and the entire entourage of cannabinoids, terpenes, etc. All right. So the other thing to note here, Section 811D also prescribes what the DEA must do to maintain U.S. compliance with international law. And so here is another vector that the DEA can kind of use to shoot down a rescheduling recommendation from the FDA. And this is particularly interesting to me because in the last couple of days, I've found a previous DEA ruling from 2018 that we'll talk about soon, that seems to kind of turn the DEA's previous statements on Section 811D and their obligation to maintain compliance with UN drug treaties kind of on its head, right? So, but the party line, at the DEA so far has been, and this is set forth in statute. If control is required under international treaties, then the Attorney General shall issue an order controlling such drug under the schedule he deems most appropriate to carry out such obligations, without regard to the findings required in subsection A of this section or section 812B, and without regard to the procedures prescribed in subsections A and B of this section. So basically saying, well, 811B doesn't matter, even though we say, hey, you got to do what the Secretary of HHS recommends that you do. This is the carve out, right? They don't have to do that in this instance if it is to maintain treaty compliance, right? So does the DEA have to reject the FDA's recommendation in order to comply with U.S. obligations under UN drug treaties? That's, again, that's the position that they have taken, right? And going back to its 2016 rule again, the DEA has stated, for us to actually comply with 811D1, the DEA must place marijuana in either Schedule 1 or Schedule 2 because cannabis is still Schedule 1 under the single convention. So, interesting note here, you guys are probably familiar with this as well, but the status of cannabis changed slightly under the single convention, where it used to be both on Schedule 1 and Schedule 4, and Schedule 4 was for things that had no accepted medical use. It was removed from Schedule 4 in the last couple of years, so it actually permits medical and scientific use. That said, when you look at what the DEA has said in its rulemakings, there's a little bit of confusion there, right? On the one hand, they're saying, hey, no, it doesn't matter what the FDA says. If we have to keep Schedule 1 or Schedule 2, keep cannabis in either Schedule 1 or Schedule 2, then that's what we're going to do because we're duty bound to do that under statute, and it's not up to us. It's the single convention, right? But when you look at what they did with respect to pharma products, and specifically, the drug Epidiolex, in 2018, they moved it from Schedule 1 to Schedule 5 upon the DEA's recommendation. And they actually went through this analysis on 811D, and surprising result here. They got creative, right? Again, they're saying here that look, we've got to, we are obliged, if the FDA recommends that Epidiolex not be Schedule 1 and that it be Schedule 5, we're obliged to remove it from Schedule 1. And they didn't put it in Schedule 2 then. They actually justified following what the FDA did. And so I'll show you on the next slide here. But basically, they're saying again here, hey, look, we know that that this compound, this CBD and Epidiolex is derived from cannabis. And so therefore it's Schedule 1 under the single convention. And because it's Schedule 1, you know, we are obliged to act accordingly, right? But interestingly, the DEA found its muse in Big Pharma, right? So when it came to Big Pharma, they were able to get flexible, right? And so they're talking about, well, you know, we can figure out, you know, in deciding what schedule is most appropriate to carry out the obligations of the single convention. We actually they have two options, right? We've got the one option is to keep it in drug schedule in Schedule 2, which will automatically require, you know, these import-export permits that are required under the single convention and are enforced through the CSA. Or maybe we can control the drug in Schedule 2, in Schedule 3, 4, or 5, and simultaneously amend the regulations to require a permit to import or export Epidiolex. Wow. Okay, so you don't have to keep it in Schedule 2. You're saying you can do Schedule 3 or Schedule 5, like the FDA is saying, as long as you amend the regulations to basically mimic the requirements that are set forth in the single convention and then repeated in the CSA. Okay, all right. So we kind of have a double standard here. To me, it seems, at least. You know, they're saying essentially they're reading 811 D, and they're saying, well, even though we're not required to pay attention to the FDA or even ask it what they think, we went ahead and, you know, acted on their recommendation. We didn't disregard it because we didn't have to. We don't actually have to consider it. We can always tell them to go pound sand, but we don't have to tell them to go pound sand. And so, you know, they went ahead and followed the DEA's recommendation, the FDA's recommendation here, justifying this decision and saying, well, we're still able to comply with the single convention as long as we can add these additional regulatory conditions to Epidiolex, and we can still follow what the FDA said and put it on Schedule 5, right? I guess the question arises then, well, why couldn't you do that in response to the FDA's recommendation here with respect to botanical cannabis to make it Schedule 3 and just apply any additional restrictions that are imposed by the single convention? Just do it by regulation, right? You don't actually have to classify it as Schedule 1 or 2. You can go ahead and do it Schedule 3. And then add whatever you need to add to gain compliance with the treaty, right? And so that's the approach that they took with respect to Epidiolex in 2018. And so something to keep in mind once we hear from the DEA on you know, what direction they're going to go. Are they going to invoke a rulemaking proceeding, have comment from the public? Or are they going to try to essentially, you know, weasel out of this and hide behind the single convention and say, oh, sorry, our hands are tied? Well, the record is pretty clear that their hands are not tied, or at least they don't think so. And so we should be very cautious to the extent that we hear the same line of argument from the DEA in response to the FDA's recommendation. So moving on to the FDA. So, and I'm not paying attention to time. Are we doing okay? All right, I'm assuming that we are, unless you tell me otherwise.
Okay, thanks.
Okay. All right, great. So turning to the FDA. Now, what will the FDA do if cannabis is actually Schedule 3 and the DEA reschedules it to Schedule 3? Again, the better questions are, you know, can't really predict exactly what they will do, but better questions are what can they do under statute and what have they done in the past, right? And so here we're talking about the Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act primarily, and the FDA polices implicit and explicit health claims about consumer products in interstate commerce under the Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act. So health claims make a product a drug under the definition offered under the Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act, right? So if you make a structure function claim, is the terminology, right? You're making a claim about, hey, this cures XYZ disease, or if you have this, that, or the other health condition, it's going to cure it or treat it. It's going to have some impact on the structure and functioning of your body, right? So if you do that, if you make that type of claim about a product that you are putting into interstate commerce, that makes it a drug under the FDCA. And all drugs in interstate commerce have to receive FDA approval, which is highly unlikely for cannabis again. And unapproved drugs can't enter interstate commerce or be used as an ingredient in food products. And so I haven't put in as many citations here because I've included 2 papers that I did on this subject, and there are plenty of citations in there, so you can check that out later on. But essentially, that is the rule under the FDCA. No unapproved drugs, and if you make a claim, health claim about something, and you put it into interstate commerce, that's a drug. Falls under FDA jurisdiction. So why is that important? Well, most, if not all, medical cannabis states prohibit making explicit health claims, right? California certainly does. You cannot make explicit health claims under our cannabis laws about a regulated cannabis product. But when you really kind of break it down, even calling something medical cannabis is already an implicit claim, right? It's an implicit claim that this product is going to treat one or more of the qualifying conditions that you need to have to be a medical cannabis patient, right? And so, that implicit claims are the basis of enforcement and have been the basis of enforcement by the FDA in the past. It's also true that once people know that a certain product or substance is widely used for a given indication, the FDA can kind of imply that consumers know what that product does, and so therefore it is a drug, right? So there are multiple hooks there that the FDA could use to say, hey, these products, these regulated state products are actually drugs, right? They haven't done so. They haven't done so yet, and we'll cover that in the next slide. But that is a distinct risk, right? That they can classify these medical cannabis products as unapproved drugs, even though they are sold pursuant to state regulations. Even adult use cannabis, commonly marketed with dietary supplement type claims like, hey, this cannabis is going to relax you, right? Like that is still, believe it or not, that is still a claim that is policed by the FDA. It's permissible for things like dietary supplements, even though it's not a structure function claim. And so, again, another kind of avenue for how the FDA can address state-regulated cannabis products under the FDCA. Another thing to note here is that the FDA doesn't actually need to wait until there's lawful interstate commerce between states, right, in order to satisfy the interstate commerce hook under the FDCA. Diversion, lawful sales to out-of-state visitors, and components of edibles traveling in interstate commerce before they end up in the final product. Those are all sufficient bases for the FDA to claim that element, the element of interstate commerce, has been met. So it is not it's not a why am I losing my vocabulary here. It's not far-fetched, right, to think that they would do this. And when we look at what's happened with hemp cannabinoids, there's reason for concern, right? What we've seen when hemp cannabinoids were effectively descheduled by the 2018 Farm Bill, is shifting enforcement priorities between the DEA and the FDA. Once hemp cannabinoids are no longer Schedule 1 due to the 2018 Farm Bill, you essentially have a little bit of a changing of the guard when it comes to hemp and hemp cannabinoid products. And so, you can see this pretty clearly when you compare the post-Farm Bill FDA enforcement against the makers of hemp cannabinoid products, CBD, and now even Delta-8 THC products derived from hemp. Compare all of the kind of warning letters that have gone out since that market has grown to what happened prior to the Farm Bill, right? It was much more of a hands-off position, even on hemp, because it's still Schedule 1. You could not grow hemp without growing marijuana, and so therefore, it's unlawful and you can't have it. So prior to the 2014 and 2018 Farm Bill, in the early 2000s, you had litigation where the Hemp Industries Association challenged some DEA overreach on hemp foods. The DEA had taken the position that even trace amounts of THC in hemp foods made them Schedule 1 substances. And so they were trying to bar them from entering the U.S. market, and could not, so at the time we were getting these products from Canada because, again, could not grow hemp in the U.S. And so these products were coming in primarily from the Canadian market. And the DEA was saying, no, can't do it anymore. I'm not going to, we're going to seize them and we're going to block them from coming in. So the HIA sued and basically, got the Ninth Circuit to agree with them, and the DEA had to reverse course on that. Now, what's interesting there is that the FDA, clearly we were talking about food products, and the FDA did not take any position whatsoever on this because the DEA's position was, hey, this is Schedule 1, right? And so the FDA did not intervene there. They deferred to the DEA because, again, Schedule 1, right? So, now what we see today when we have a thriving market in hemp cannabinoids, and including intoxicating hemp cannabinoids, is the DEA has gone from saying that, even trace amounts of THC in hemp foods are Schedule 1 and make the entire product Schedule 1 to now saying basically, hey, it's not our problem. Now they're saying intoxicating cannabinoids derived from hemp are no longer controlled and outside its jurisdiction. And so in one of the articles I included, Rescheduling and the War on Cannabis, there are citations there, including to a letter that the DEA sent to, I believe it was the Tennessee Board of Pharmacy, where the Board of Pharmacy had asked, like, hey, who's, are you policing this? Because we've got rampant trade in intoxicating hemp cannabinoids in our state, and we don't know if they're legal or not. And the DEA essentially said, yes, they are legal if they come from hemp. If the same exact thing came from a marijuana plant, then it would be within our jurisdiction and we would police that. But if it's from hemp, it's not. It's out of our purview, right? So you've seen this kind of shift as hemp cannabinoids were descheduled, going from Schedule 1 to being completely descheduled. You see how the agencies have acted, right? What their reaction has been. So another thing to point out here is that FDA enforcement was kind of the norm prior to certain controlled substances being scheduled by the DEA. That includes MDMA and some other substances as well. And again, these are cited in that second article, which there's a hyperlink to. So if anyone would like these slides with all the hyperlinks, I'm happy to drop this into whatever Dropbox you guys are using to review this stuff. But that is the presentation. So I'm happy to answer any questions. at this point, and I know I flew through a lot there very quickly. So, and I know, again, don't even know how much time I've spent here. So everyone could be well on their way to drinks by now.
Not quite yet. I'm muting you just for a second because, sorry. I do have a question came online. How does dronabinol, trade name Marinol, fit into this discussion, if at all? Oh, wait, now I had to ask you to unmute. Oh, I should be able to hear you.
Yeah, it gave me a prompt to unmute. So dronabinol is certainly interesting. I did not look up the actually, let me stop sharing here. Great, there we go. Okay, I did not look through the Federal Register for the rulemaking on dronabinol, but it would be very interesting to review that, and I may just go do that to see how they handled this obligation that they have under 811D. But I do have a note in one of the articles about dronabinol. I think it's in the second article that rescheduling won't end the war on cannabis, and so I have some treatment in there of that, but happy to kind of entertain any follow-up questions once folks take a look at that.
Sounds good. Hang on.
Khurshid, you're muted.
Okay, I don't know if you're curating questions,
There you
Ellen.
go.
You should read off questions from the chat. I'll just go ahead and do that unless you tell me otherwise. All right, so I see.
Sorry, we were having a question from the room.
Oh,
Did
sorry.
you
Go ahead.
hear the question from the room?
You're not, there, now talk. Did you hear?
Can you hear the question from the room?
I can hear you right now.
Okay, the question from the room was, are you saying the DEA has the power to reschedule THC? Is that the question, Karen?
Reschedule or deschedule?
The
Deschedule, but won't, because it has, basically, because the FDA has a veto power. Is kind of just a broad.
No, I think it's
brush,
backwards. I think that's
No,
backwards.
it's
where he thinks we're going.
So she's saying, does the FDA have veto power over the DEA on rescheduling, right?
No, it's the opposite, right? So the DEA
Right.
basically tell the FDA, hey, thanks for your recommendation, but we don't agree, and it doesn't meet our 5-factor test, or we can't do this because we're obligated to keep it at no lower than Schedule 2 because of the single convention, right? So now, and reading that Epidiolex ruling, though, to me, it kind of begs the question of, well, how far can this approach go, right? If you can say basically, look, schmeduling, it doesn't matter, right? We'll just kind of put it all into regulation, right? So to the extent that we need to restrict imports and exports, the extent that we kind of need to keep track of who's licensed and who's not, how much is being produced, et cetera, we can do that in regulation, right? It doesn't have to be something that we do by making something Schedule 1 or Schedule 2. We can just kind of take we can do a little workaround there. And that's our little hack, right? Is we're going to make Epidiolex Schedule 5, but we're going to, essentially apply a lot of the single convention rules here promulgated, through DEA regulations. Right now, kind of it does beg the question of like, well, couldn't you arguably do that with at least with medical cannabis, right? Because the UN has basically said, hey, all right, this isn't Schedule 4 under the single convention anymore. That means there's an accepted medical use, right? So member states of the UN are allowed to make medical and scientific use of cannabis. And so, couldn't you at least argue that, hey, if you descheduled all medical cannabis and you have in place in, each of the 50 states, either, outright prohibition, or you have a licensed, regulated, taxed medical cannabis industry that has, controls in place and could, also incorporate additional controls to satisfy the single convention. Couldn't you, if you're the DEA, just say all medical cannabis is descheduled at the federal level, and we're going to leave it to the states to control, and that's how we are going to satisfy our obligations under the single convention, right? Like, I'm sure it's not quite as easy as I am speculating there, and I've looked through the, there are factors in the Epidiolex ruling that's hyperlinked in the slide deck that talk about exactly what you need to do under the single convention to for things that are otherwise Schedule 1, right? And so, we may.
The other questions?
Yeah.
Can we make questions? I'm sorry, or wrap that up. Did that answer your question?
Yes, thank you.
Okay. So Michael Chernus asks, assuming it is rescheduled as 3 and overcomes FDA issues, how do we overcome Schedule 2? 3 requirement for prescription access only?
I think that's a excellent question, right? Like I don't know, short of actually requiring prescriptions, because that is a requirement for Schedule 3 substances, which is why a lot of people are really not very happy with the Biden administration for stopping short, having all of this kind of discussion in the declaration about how this isn't fair and people are going to jail for a plant, and this is ludicrous. Great. If you agree, then why is it Schedule 3? Schedule 3 still has criminal penalties if you violate the CSA, and if you are a medical cannabis patient, you need a prescription from a physician, right? And so, how much more difficult would it be to get a prescription, given that, we have had in the past a thriving market for medical recommendations? Maybe it's not as hard as I think it's going to be, right? But yeah, either you satisfy it or you don't, and if you don't, you're in violation, right? And so that's why Schedule 3 is still an improvement, but it doesn't go anywhere near as far as we need to on criminal penalties and on decriminalizing the industry and consumers.
Dale has something to add to that, and then that dovetails into our next 2 questions.
Yeah, Khurshid, I really enjoyed your talk there. My PhD thesis was on FDA drug regulation. And
Wow.
this is the deep stuff. But I just want to say, I really regard the scheduling decision to be monumental. Normal, launched the very first lawsuit to reschedule marijuana to Schedule 2 back in 1972. It's 50 years.
Yeah.
That lawsuit actually lasted for 19 years before finally getting turned down. And then there were several subsequent rescheduling petitions that were likewise turned down cold, even when we were arguing. Anyhow.
I'm sorry, the camera just did something really fun.
So,
You're my camera woman, Dana.
so anyhow.
If they can.
Oh, I'm sorry.
That's all right.
Jesus. Okay.
The joys of Zoom.
Real, but I regard this as a tremendous victory for us. It shows we were right all along. The government confesses, all right. And I think this is the first step towards what's got to end up in descheduling, but it's really monumental that the government is recognizing that, yes, marijuana has medical use. Okay.
Absolutely.
It's a big deal, and it's going to help in a lot of states, in a lot of mainstream medicinal doctors who are afraid to touch it now, but as long as it's in Schedule 1.
What about manufacturers?
There's not gonna be any manufacture. It will take forever.
Uh-oh, you guys are frozen on your end. Can you guys hear me?
I can hear you on Zoom, but they
Okay.
do appear frozen in the room.
Okay.
Um, so let's see if I've got any questions. I mean, I do think it's interesting to kind of think about whether or not enforcement's going to increase or decrease if it goes to Schedule 3. I was reading an interview the other day, you might have read it as well, with a former FDA, I don't know if he was commissioner, but he was pretty high up at the FDA, and he was basically opining that, hey, look, if we've kind of taken this kind of hands off for the most part approach when it was Schedule 1, it's not very logical to think that our enforcement is going to increase when the schedule goes to a lower schedule. And I found that a little bit reassuring, although of course he's not a current employee, he's a former employee. So I'm wondering what you think about that position.
Well, so he is also a paid lobbyist, right, for a lot of the Wall Street cannabis firms that are really, rah rescheduling. And again, like, I want rescheduling. I would prefer descheduling, but I am certainly not somebody who is going to, dig in heels and say, look, this isn't good to reschedule. I think it's an improvement. I think that particular individual, though, it's a bit disingenuous, right? Because it's not like all of the letters, the warning letters provided to hemp products manufacturers aren't public record, right? Like anyone can view them, years and years of letters, right? All of this stuff is documented. And so, I think it's again, I think it's disingenuous. I think it's also dishonest to kind of wave away any concerns and say, well, if we didn't do anything when it was Schedule 1, why would we do it when it's Schedule 3? Well, I've kind of demonstrated that, right? Because and this, I'm not the only one who has said this. There are a number of other academics that are quoted in the first paper in Cannabis Cannibalism on how the DEA and the FDA handle enforcement when it comes to scheduled controlled substances and Schedule 1, right? And so, I mean, he can certainly say, hey, we haven't done anything up until now. Why would we do it after it's on a lower schedule? Well, because the DEA is going to stop doing it. The DEA is not going to enforce it anymore. And just as you have with hemp cannabinoid products, you're going to have the public saying, why the fuck aren't you doing something? Some of these products are being sold in, wrapped in candy wrappers that are appealing to children. You got to do something about this. And they are doing something about it, right? And so, why wouldn't they do something if it's lower, it's scheduled lower? Well, potentially because they are going to be working with the state regulators to ensure that there is ample enforcement, right? But for them to be able to do that, there still needs to be a rule applicable to cannabinoids. And so, there isn't one right now. It's all being treated as a drug under the FDCA, and we need something different to ensure that, the FDA can go after bad actors, folks who are working outside of the regulated system, outside of the purview of law, while still preserving what we have at the state level with state medical cannabis regulators and adult use cannabis regulators. So I think it's a work in progress, right? But yeah, I find it kind of borderline offensive to have these really highly paid former FDA officials just kind of come out and say, your concerns are stupid. No, they're not. And there is ample history to show that they're not, and that you've done exactly what we thought you would do, with hemp cannabinoids.
Those are all very good points.
Are they coming back? I don't know if they're coming back.
I'm not sure. So I'm just looking through the questions here on Zoom. It looks like, kind of most of this has been addressed already. I guess I'm not sure. Did you already answer this? Oh, maybe you did. Since Cal Normal's going to answer this one live. Do you think there's any risk to the state system that's set up currently under Schedule 3, the state-by-state system? How would a move to Schedule 3 impact that? I don't necessarily think it would impact that too much. What do you think?
Well, again, I think as long as we have state regulatory mechanisms in place, there is less of an impetus to need to act. Right now, that's not the same thing as saying, hey, the FDCA just doesn't apply here, right? Like, yeah, actually, it does apply. And you don't need to even have lawful interstate commerce for the FDA to have a jurisdictional hook, right? Anything that is potentially diverted from a state, anything that is purchased by an out-of-state visitor from a state, anything that includes an ingredient that was transported interstate commerce into that made it into an edible that is now sold in that state. Those are all fair game under the FDCA, right? And again, we're talking about products that have come with at least implicit claims and oftentimes explicit claims too, right? And so that's exactly how you would characterize some of these hemp cannabinoid products, right? And so the only thing that is stopping them from taking aggressive action is the fact that the state regulators are there to keep things under control. Right now, that being said, in my discussions with the FDA folks who are working on cannabis and hemp cannabinoids, I've suggested in the past, like, well, hey, why do we even need you guys to do this? Like, if we have the state regulators in place and they're doing their job, right, then like easy peasy, you guys don't need to do anything, right? And his response was, well, no, there's always going to be bad actors, and just kind of as an institutional point, like, why would we give up power that we have now voluntarily, right? Like, we are always going to want to reserve that power, if nothing else, than to police bad actors that maybe are beyond the purview of some of these state regulators, right? And it's not an invalid point when you think about things like E-Valley, right? And the kind of complete lack of coordination going on there. I mean, a lot of that was because these were not regulated products. These were knockoff counterfeit products. And they were being, they were in interstate commerce, and they were getting people sick across the country, right? In that instance, you kind of do need a federalized public health authority to come in and say, this has got to stop, and we're going to, institute measures to police this and to get these goods out of the market, right? And so, I get their point. And so they are not going to essentially take no role, right? I just don't see that. I thought it was, would make their jobs easier, but that's not necessarily the calculus that's going on here.
All right. Well, let me see. Is there, I'm going to give everyone who's here on Zoom a final moment to type any questions, and then I think we'll wrap it up. I do
I really wanted to
appreciate.
hear Ellen's questions. She said there were 2 questions after Dale's comment, and it's such a shame. She hasn't texted back, right? Let me just text her.
No, she has not. But I will make sure that if anyone else who is there in the room has questions, they can email you. And everyone should have access to all the different speakers' materials throughout the day, which hopefully should have a contact info there. And if not, you can reach out to Cal Normal, and we'll get you information for all of today's speakers. So I'm not seeing any new questions come in. Someone just asked if they'd have access to the recorded session. And yes, once this recording is processed, that'll be available through California Normal. So I just wanted to take a moment to thank you, Khurshid, for your presentation, and also to thank everyone else who is watching today, who's watched, and everyone else who's spoken today. We had some really great information. And thank you again to California Normal for putting on today's legal seminar. And like I just said, this recording will be made available. And thank you all for attending.
Thanks, everyone.